So, Steve, are we going to be doing the opening of the show this week? I'll take that as a no. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. I am your host, Steve the Cat. And of course, thank you very much to our friends, the social media fact checkers, for pointing out that this is not, in fact, Steve the Cat. This is Steve's animatronic stunt double. The voice you are hearing is not Steve the Cat. It is the voice of Carl, the production assistant. Hello, I'm behind the camera. I had hoped Steve would agree to host this week's episode. Negotiations were going okay, but they broke down at the last minute again related to craft services issues. Anyway, we're going to get to it. So what is Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat? If you're new, this is a show where we discuss horror movies. Now, we try to make this show accessible to people who are, say, new to the genre, or casual fans, but not hardcore. If you go to horror forums online or horror forums on Facebook or what have you, a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of hardcore fans, and it can be kind of intimidating if you're new and they're talking about movies that you've never heard of. We on this show try to stick to discussion of stuff that is a little more accessible to the newbie, a little more accessible to the casual fan. Now, we stay away from stuff that everybody's seen, so we don't talk about Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street and such, but we do not delve into some of the obscure art movies that only the hardcore fans would watch. We're going to talk about one of my favorite movies today, so we're going to get right to it. So stand by. Here we go with this week's episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. So before we get into today's movie, we have to do a quick vocabulary lesson. Now, if you are new to the show, Steve's vocabulary lesson is where we delve into creative use of the English language in order to stay ahead of social media bots and algorithms and avoid being banned. Today's first word, leaf on the wind. No, that is not a phrase, that is a verb. Specifically, it is a verb meaning to suddenly kill off a major character without warning or foreshadowing in a way that is quick, simple, and stunning in its finality. Next word, diggin' clonking. This is a noun that refers to the action of applying a digging instrument, typically a shovel, to a character's head. It can result in denoggening, although this is not required. When employed in a comedic manner, a digging clonking can result in memory loss, or it may restore the memory of a character already suffering from memory loss. The rules of the digging clonking are a little bit elastic. The term digging clonking is originally a German word which literally translated means take the shovel and put it to some good use. It was later popularized in America by Bugs Bunny and Mel Brooks. So let's get to know our Scream Queen for this episode, Alexandra Daddario. There she is. You can see her from several different films. Alexandra Daddario was born in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. Her parents were an attorney and a high-ranking member of law enforcement in New York City. Her grandfather was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. This is not somebody who grew up in a hard-scrabble life, who had to go through many hardships on her way to fame. She made her breakthrough in the Percy Jackson movies. Now, Little bit of backstory here. The teenage girls that live in my house and eat my food are of the generation who grew up on Rick Riordan novels in general and Percy Jackson books in particular. From what they have told me, Alexandra Daddario is actually not popular with the Percy Jackson fandom because of these movies. Now, that's not necessarily because of anything she did personally. It sounds like it has more to do with discussed with the filmmakers and the way they changed her character in translating the book into a movie. So make of that what you want, but that was her breakthrough in the Percy Jackson movies. She's been in other big budget action movies like San Andreas and Baywatch, both starring The Rock. Interestingly, from what I was able to research, she also filmed a scene for The Rock's big budget action movie Rampage about giant monsters, but her scene was cut from the film and not included in the final release. Fans of horror will know Alexandra Daddario from Texas Chainsaw 3D. If you have Netflix, you may have seen her in the recent release We Summon the Darkness, and she also appeared in American Horror Story. Alright, let's get to the heart of this episode. This episode's movie is Malevolence 2 Bereavement. You see the poster right there. This is a slasher serial killer movie that was released in the year 2010. It was directed by Stefan Mena, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name. And it stars Michael Bain, Alexandra Daddario, Brett Rickaby, John Savage, Spencer List, and Peyton List. So let's talk about Bereavement. So Bereavement is actually part of a trilogy of movies, starting with Malevolence and ending with Malevolence 3 Killer. So let's quickly review what goes on in this trilogy. Malevolence is actually a very interesting concept for a movie. A team of bank robbers, after pulling a job, meet up at an abandoned farmhouse to split the loot, not knowing that the farmhouse is part of a serial killer's hunting grounds. So it's kind of a Tarantino intersects Michael Myers kind of film. Malevolence 3 Killer picks up immediately after the events of Malevolence and follows the hunt for the serial killer after he has been flushed from his lair. So now you're thinking, wait a minute, if Malevolence 3 picks up immediately after the events of Malevolence, then what is this movie we're going to talk about today, Malevolence 2? Well, I'll tell you, Malevolence 2 is the prequel that sets the stage for Malevolence. Why do we need a prequel for Malevolence? Well, let's talk about that. Malevolence actually opens with a man named Graham Suter kidnapping a very young boy named Martin Bristol. Now, Graham Suter takes Martin Bristol to his lair, and you think, oh my goodness, he's going to murder Martin Bristol. But instead of doing that, Graham Suter murders somebody else and makes Martin Bristol watch. And what you discover is that Graham Suter is a serial killer who is looking for an apprentice slash heir slash somebody to help him clean up after the fact. So you have a serial killer kidnapping a very young boy and effectively molding him into his apprentice. You then fast forward 10 years into the future where you have a bank robbery. The bank robbers meet in a pastoral setting out in the Lehigh Valley to try to split the loot and encounter the now fully developed Martin Bristol, and tragedy ensues. Now, this movie is a tribute to Halloween. You could call it an homage. Some people might say it's a ripoff. Having watched it, I don't get the impression that it was a ripoff. I get the impression that this is somebody who was inspired by Halloween and wanted to make a movie in the same vein. It is very low budget. It is featuring an unknown cast, and when I say an unknown cast, I mean unknown cast of people who were cast from the Lehigh Valley area of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, so it's not even Hollywood or New York unknowns. The focus is on suspense, more so than violence and gore. That's pretty typical in a low-budget film. It starts out a bit shaky and gets better as it goes along, and when I say it starts out a bit shaky, a couple of specific things. Number one of the bad guys has a scar that is less than convincing. Frankly, it looks like 5 minutes before filming, the director pointed at one of the actors, pointed at the makeup director, and said, hey, make that guy look a little more villainy. Also, you have two characters, a mother and a daughter, who eventually end up being taken hostage in the film. The mother has an English accent. The daughter sounds like Arthur Fonzarelli auditioning for a role in Goodfellas. There's really no explanation as to how these two people are related. It could have been explained, but they chose not to. But, all in all, it ends up being a decent slasher flick that is worth watching. It might not be what you'd call an appointment movie, where you set the entire evening aside just for this movie, but definitely worth watching. Now, Malevolence 3 picks up immediately after the events of Malevolence. It continues the homage to Halloween. It has a much bigger budget than Malevolence. Again, mostly unknown cast, but the acting is significantly improved. It runs up the body count much like the Halloween sequels, so if you're not familiar with the Halloween movies, the original movie focused a lot on suspense and fright, and the later movies became more of how many people is Michael Myers going to kill and in what exotic ways is he going to kill them. So in that respect, this is kind of like the Halloween sequels. It's less of a suspense movie, more of a run-up-the-body-count movie, but still a good film. Now, an interesting thing about this movie, and a tragic one of the lead actors became ill and died during filming with little budget for reshoots. So the film feels a little disjointed. In fact, it's a testament to the director's ability that this movie was released at all. Some aspects of the movie probably have more of an ensemble feel than the director intended to go for originally, and that's because he's taking what would have been secondary and tertiary characters and kind of pushing them more into the limelight simply because his lead actor died and was not able to finish filming. Again, this is a pretty good slasher flick. I would definitely say it's worth watching, but my favorite of the trio, far and away, is Malevolence 2 Bereavement, the prequel that sets the stage for Malevolence. Now, this is the biggest budget of the three films. Now, I say that with an asterisk. I have not been able to find data on the third movie, but just watching the three films, the second film feels far and away like the biggest budget movie of the three. It is definitely, of the three, the only one that has name actors like Michael Biehn and Alexandra Daddario. It takes the opening scene from Malevolence and builds it into a standalone story. It tells the story of how Martin Bristol is made into a serial killer. It is not a cheesy slasher flick. It is a dark drama about a serial killer. This is not Jason Takes Manhattan. This is more Silence of the Lambs. Now, let me slow my roll there. I am not saying this movie is as good as Silence of the Lambs. What I am saying is the tone of the movie is the same. You watch this movie for the same reason you watch a movie like Silence of the Lambs. You do not watch it to see people wink at the camera, occasionally make quips, occasionally break the fourth wall, occasionally make references to other horror movies. There's none of that. This movie is played perfectly straight. Significant effort goes into character development. It is the story around three broken families. Alexandra Daddario is recently orphaned and has moved in with her aunt and uncle out in the rural parts of Pennsylvania. The second broken family is Alexandra Daddario's love interest and his disabled father, who they have a somewhat broken relationship. The third broken family being Graham Suter raising the boy Martin Bristol. The killings in this movie are shockingly violent, and there's just no other way to describe it. They are shockingly violent. It is a very dark story, and it is not bound by the rules of mainstream slasher movies. Do not assume that this is going to follow the rules that you normally see in a Friday the 13th type movie. let's talk about some of Steve's impressions of this film. It is a prequel that works well as a standalone film. In fact, arguably this is the best prequel I have ever seen, simply because it works so well as a standalone movie. If it were not for one after-credit scene in this movie, there is really nothing connecting it to the other movies, and I mean that in a good way. You don't have to have watched the other movies in order to enjoy this film, and that's why I made this film the subject of this episode. You can sit down and watch this, never go back and watch part 1 and part 3 and have a coherent, end-to-end, outstanding movie-going experience. It does not fall into any of the traps like George Lucas fell into, where Anakin Skywalker created C-3PO and Yoda was the best man at Chewbacca's wedding, or anything like that. It avoids the unnecessary need to tie events together that need not be tied together. So in that respect, it is a well-done prequel. It is well acted. There is depth of character. This is not a movie that falls back on the classic cardboard cutout characters of the slut, the jock, the nerd, the stoner, and the virgin. All these characters have personalities, they all have faults, they all have flaws, they all have strong points, they're all real human beings. It has absolutely beautiful cinematography. This movie looks good on a big screen. And the fact that it uses well-developed characters gives additional impact to the killings. This is a movie that actually makes you feel things. This is not a movie where you go and root for the killer necessarily. It is dark, dark, dark. It is not for the faint of heart. The whole gist of this movie is that a young boy is slowly being warped into becoming a serial killer. There is nothing happy about that subject matter. So, what are some of the themes of this film? Well, nature versus nurture. Well, the nurture aspect of this is pretty obvious. You have a young boy being kidnapped by a serial killer and being raised in a serial killer environment. The nature side of this is that we find out at the beginning of this movie that Martin Bristol has been born with a physiological condition that prevents him from feeling pain. And that is a real condition, and it is something that can have severe psychological and psychiatric implications for somebody, even growing up in a healthy environment. But in this case, you have somebody suffering from that condition, being raised by a serial killer, and just giving you the mother of all black swan events in terms of nature and nurture. The Lehigh Valley acts as another character in the film. The director obviously loves the Lehigh Valley. There's just many long, gorgeous shots of the valley mixed in with the movie. Here's a couple of samples that will pop up here. You can take it a couple of ways with all these shots of the valley introduced into the movie. You can take that to mean the world goes on turning regardless of what happens to all of us, or you can take it to mean that small towns and pastoral settings are not immune to crime and violence, which, again, was one of the themes of the original Halloween. The movie plays on a lot of fears: kidnapping, helplessness, confinement, fire. If you are a parent, you worry about your children being kidnapped. This movie opens with a parent's worst nightmare, her 6-year-old being kidnapped right out of his own backyard while playing on the swing set. And it's a movie that will really raise the hairs on the back of your neck if you let it. So let's talk about the villain profile. Malevolence 2's villain is a man named Graham Suter, and there you see him. Now, he is a slasher serial killer. He has no special powers. He's very cunning. He's very good at stalking his prey. He's very good at covering his tracks, but beyond that, he's just a guy. His signature weapon, you see right there, he likes to use a butcher knife, and his signature technique is highly ritualized utilization of an old meatpacking plant. Now, if we jump forward to Malevolence 1 and Malevolence 3, the killer is Martin Bristol. You see him there with his trademark mask. He also is a slasher serial killer who was raised and trained by Graham Suter. His special power, as we said, is his inability to feel physical pain. His signature weapon, again, a butcher knife, but it is not exclusively used. He prefers a butcher knife, but he's just as comfortable, for example, using a lawnmower blade. Signature technique, I'm going to say repeatedly stabbing, much like Michael and Judith Myers in the opening of the original Halloween. Now, if you have not seen the original Halloween, In so many movies, when somebody is stabbed, they're stabbed a single time, and then they kind of go, "Oh, you got me," and slowly sink to the floor. That is not how Michael Myers killed Judith Myers. Michael Myers killed Judith Myers in what the criminal investigators would call an overkill situation, just stabbing her repeatedly and violently. And Martin Bristol's technique is very much the same way in this movie. So again, very much an homage to the original Halloween. All right, let's go to Steve's scorecard for the movie Malevolence 2 Bereavement. Kills. 10. 10 of them. It's actually quite a lot for a serious movie. Bare breasts. I'm going to give it an asterisk. It's a live actress playing the part of a dead body. I will let you perverts decide how you want to score that one. I want nothing to do with it. Car chases. 0. Sorry, it's not that kind of movie. Leaf on the Windings. Yeah, there is one of those. Digging clonkings. Yeah, there's one of those too, and it is decidedly not comedic in nature. Possumings. Well, there's none, but there is one near miss. Use of telephone to provide exposition. None. 0. Zilch. This is actually a competent movie that does not fall back on the laziest trope in all of filmmaking. And finally, tank tops completely overwhelmed by an actress's physical attribute. Oh, good Lord, yes, there is one of those. The entire final third of the movie, the limits of textile engineering are put to the test to contain Alexandra Daddario's female attributes, including time spent in a stand-up freezer. So, Steve's final score for Malevolence 2? 4 paws out of 4. An outstanding movie. A very dark drama with shocking bits of violence, good acting, and beautiful camera work. Alright, before we go, let's talk about some other stuff Steve watched this week. Number 1, Black Pumpkin. This is a horror movie about a collection of middle school and high schoolers battling a local Halloween legend. It is a PG-13-ish kind of movie. And, it's not bad. Wouldn't go out of my way for it, but it's not bad. Second movie, Vile. This is, there's no other way to say it, this is a torture porn feature about 8 people being held captive. It's not bad if you don't mind torture porn. If you don't like torture porn, you will find this absolutely unbearable. So let the buyer beware. You know what you're getting into with a movie called Vile. Finally, Bunny Man, Grindhouse Edition. No. No, 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 no. Let me talk about Bunny Man for a minute. So, I have in my life attempted to watch Bunny Man twice now, and I have not been able to finish it either time. I tried to watch it years ago. It is one of those so bad it's good, and I say that in quotes, movies. Basically, the Cannibal Hillbilly run amok, except one of the Cannibal Hillbillies is wearing a bunny suit for some inexplicable reason. Maybe I shouldn't say inexplicable. Maybe they explained it later in the movie and I just never made it that far. It is horrible. It is horrible. The acting is horrible. It's not funny. The editing is terrible. The sound is terrible. The camera work is terrible. The acting is terrible. The writing is terrible. Everything about it is terrible. It is just, you can feel your brain cells dying as you watch this movie. They're attempting to make it funny by making it bad, but sometimes a bad movie is just bad. I mean, listen, I grew up watching Mystery Science Theater 3000. I love the whole MST3K treatment of bad movies, but some movies are just bad to the point that they're not enjoyable. The Grindhouse Edition took this bad movie and re-edited it and recut it to try to make it look like an old 70s exploitation grindhouse feature, which effectively means they took a terrible movie and made it look worse, sound worse, and less coherent. And it is just painful to watch. I didn't even make it as far as I made it the first time watching the Grindhouse Edition. When I watched the original Bunny Man, I sometimes wondered, were they trying to make a serious movie here, or were they intentionally trying to make a comedy? The Grindhouse Edition at least answers that question. There are some points in the movie, for example, where the cast of teenagers who are stranded in the woods are walking, and in the Grindhouse Edition, they suddenly cut in stock footage of various wildlife from Africa with a voiceover of people going, "Oh my, look, we have walked so far that we are in Africa. There is a rhinoceros." And yeah, ha ha ha, it is supposed to be funny. Look how cool we are. We're so hip. We're so meta. We're making fun of our own movie. It's not funny. It's horrible. It is horrible, horrible, horrible. Shame on you all. Shame on everyone involved in making this movie. Shame on you all for making 2 sequels to this, neither of which I have even made the attempt to watch. And if you are one of those people that likes Bunny Man, I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. Just shame on all of you. Well, that does it for another episode of Spooky Tales with Steve the Cat. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will join us again soon. Bye-bye. Well, we've reached the end of this episode. Is there anything you'd like to add? I guess we're done. Thanks for watching.